Welcome to APCUG's Wednesday workshop, where we get together midweek where someone explains technology for our understanding. Our theme this day is "'Tis the Season for Taking Pictures and Videos." And our presenter this morning is going to be Mark Schulman. Mark's been with us many times, so we're not going to take the time to introduce him. He's coming to us from the warm area for those of us who are in the north part where it's a little bit cooler. And Mark's going to share with us today about the importance of preserving your digital photos that we take during these holiday seasons. So Mark, off to you.
Thanks so much. Glad to be here. So let me share my screen. And if anybody can't see that, let me know.
I'm
going to talk. Okay, good. We're going to talk today about preserving digital photos. And most people's reaction to that is, I didn't know that was a thing. I didn't know that was something I had to do. But I hope to convince you by the end of this presentation that it is a thing. Just a couple quick points about me. My name is Mark Schulman. I've been in IT computers for close to 45 years now. And the important thing I want you to know is that I'm going to talk about one or two products here, and I don't have any affiliation with any of them. So I'm going to talk about some products that I either know about or have used, and don't care whether or not you actually decide to use them. So we'll start the presentation by talking about the rise of digital photography and what the promise of digital photography was. So the way things used to be looked something like this. Everybody had photo albums in their house, and it was full of old, usually faded photos. And one of the downsides, we'll talk about this in a minute, was that was typically the only copy you had of any of these photos. If something happened to the photo album, if it got lost along the way, then that was the end of those photos. But everybody knew what a photo album was, and you could spot them on people's shelves, and photos rarely got lost. They sometimes got destroyed accidentally, but they rarely got lost. Around 2000, an amazing thing happened. Digital photography started to take off. And here's a couple points. I'm not going to read through all of this, but and you can get these slides. I'll make sure Judy has them at the end of the presentation. So if you want to look through this in a little more detail, you can. But digital photography has slowly overtaken traditional film photography to the point where I saw an interesting statistic a few weeks ago. It said that 90% of the people that have taken photos have never actually touched a camera. It's all through smartphones now. And I still have a regular camera. It takes digital photos now. I don't have a film camera anymore, but I actually still use a camera. Most people don't. Most people just take photos with smartphones, and those, of course, are digital cameras. I looked up a statistic, and the current projection is that there are about 6.6 billion smartphones with cameras worldwide. So more photographers these days than we ever thought there would be. So let's talk about digital photography. There are still some people taking actual film photographs, but most people are taking digital photos. So the amazing thing is it costs almost nothing to take a photo. And that's so different. I can remember going on vacation when I was young, and I'd take with me 6 or 7 rolls of film, and I really thought about what I was going to take pictures of because it costs money. Every photo I took cost money, and now it really doesn't. It's easy to take thousands of photos. I come back from vacation, and I know nobody wants to sit through thousands of photos. I hope everybody here knows that. But I would take thousands of photos, and then I would cull that down to just a few that I would show people. You can make unlimited perfect copies of your photos. And we've all seen that. We see a photo on somebody else's phone and we say, hey, send me a copy of that. And the copy we get is just as good as the copy that the person had on their phone. We can edit them. And I don't know how many of you do this, probably most of you. If I take a photo and it's got other people in the photo that I don't want, I can crop it, I can resize it. Sometimes I can even edit the photo that I can remove people from the photo. And we do that a lot today. A digital camera or a phone has a huge capacity in it. So my phone can take thousands of photos before it fills up. And digital photos can last forever, theoretically. We're going to talk more about that. Theoretically, again, they'll never fade, smear, or tear. And so the photos that our descendants have 100, 200 years from now ought to be flawless. And we can count on, I hope, our descendants having this beautiful record of how we lived our lives and what we experienced when we were here. But there's a downside to digital photos too that nobody ever thinks about. So let's talk about that for a second. Digital photos are intangible. We can look at them on our phone. We can look at them on our monitor. And of course, we can print them out. That makes them tangible. But we don't really have a grasp of what does it mean that I've got digital photos on my hard drive. I can't see them on my hard drive. So they're a lot more intangible than photos used to be. And I'll show you why that's important here in just a second. Every day, millions of digital photos are taken, maybe billions. I don't know. I just assume it's millions, but maybe it's actually billions. But here's the bad part. Every day, countless digital photos are lost. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. And that's going to be the focus of our presentation here. People, their phones get damaged, they lose their phones, their hard drive crashes, and they may lose hundreds of thousands of photos every time that happens. It would be, I really think if we could know the number of photographs that are lost every day, it would be in the millions easily. And most people don't know how to preserve them and make sure that this doesn't happen. And that's some of what we're going to talk about. So I want to tell you a quick story about the box. What happened was my mom had grown up in Nashville, and the house had changed hands a number of times. And my parents were in Nashville in 2003, and my mom wanted to stop by her childhood home. And of course, it was now owned by somebody we didn't know, but they knocked on the door and they introduced themselves, and they actually had a very nice time chatting with the people who now lived in the house. And my mom told them some stories about the house as she was growing up in it, and they actually exchanged contact information. A few years later, the people were doing renovations and they happened to knock down a wall, and behind the wall was an old dresser that they didn't even know was there, and the dresser was full of photographs and film strips and negatives and all kinds of other memorabilia that had belonged to my uncle. And so they invited my mom to come up and get them, and she seriously thought about doing that, but in the end, they mailed her these photographs, all these memorabilia that they had found in this dresser, and there is a photo of the actual box when it arrived before they opened it. And the photos you see here were actual photos that my mom had never seen before, and I know who these people are, that was in the box. So she got hundreds and hundreds of photos that she didn't even know existed. But the thing that's important about this, why is this story important? Because as soon as these people opened the dresser drawers and looked inside of them, they immediately said, oh, those are photographs. Maybe we should contact this person that we met not very long ago and ask her what she wants us to do with these photographs. I saw an interesting quote of probably a decade ago right now, and I wish I could remember where I saw it, and I don't remember where I saw it, and I'm sorry, but it's always stuck with me. The professional photographer had written, "Our family history ended the day we got a digital camera." And think about that for a second. Why? Because even though digital photographs have the ability to be preserved as far into the future as you can imagine, most people don't ensure that that happens. And the vast majority of digital photos probably that have been taken in the last few decades have been lost. So what I want to talk to you about is how to preserve your photos. And we want to make sure that your photos survive into your future so that not only can you enjoy them, but your kids, your grandkids, your great-grandchildren have this record of the photos that you took. I want to make sure that your photos are identifiable, and I'll talk to you about what I mean by that. And I want to make sure that your photos are actually found by people who will care about them. So I told you the story about how these physical photos were found and gotten back to my parents. And so I want to talk to you about how do you make sure that sort of thing happens with digital photos as well. So let's consider each one of these. First of all, we want to make sure that your photos survive. An important thing to realize, and hopefully this group understands it, but maybe not, is that every hard drive will eventually fail. I saw a paper that was written a few years ago, and there's a link to it, to that paper at the bottom of the slide. And again, if you get these slides from Judy, you can go look at that paper. There's a company that does backups called Backblaze. And at the time they did this study, they had over 41,000 hard drives. And what they found is that some brands of hard drive had up to a 26% annual failure rate. What that means is if you owned 4 of these hard drives, every year one of them would fail. And if that hard drive was the only place you had all your photos and videos stored, say goodbye to them. So the key point to make sure that your photos survive is copies, copies, copies. And I've got a presentation that I do on backups. We talk about that. I think I've done that for APCUG before. But the key point is your photos should never exist only in one place. It's easy to accidentally erase them. And again, all hard drives fail. So if your photos only exist in one place, eventually that hard drive is going to fail. And by the way, same thing true for SD cards, flash drives, things like that. They will all eventually fail. Files on your hard drive might not be found. You might move and leave a hard drive behind accidentally. At some point, you might pass away and somebody might find your hard drive and never think to examine it to find all your photos. So it's really important that there be copies in other places. But what should you copy the photos onto? We need to make sure that it's something that's going to last a long time. Should you copy it onto another hard drive? Should you copy it onto SD cards, flash drives? Where should you keep your copies? Someone has to be able to actually read it. So suppose you store all your photos on an SD card and somebody finds the SD card in 20 years, are they still going to be using SD cards? You can imagine somebody that maybe 10 years ago copied all their photos onto floppy disks, and now most people can't read a floppy disk. I don't have a floppy disk reader. Whatever you copy it on has to have a reasonable size. Another reason why floppy disks would have been a bad choice is today a floppy disk can't even hold one full-size photo. So floppy disks would have been a really bad choice to copy photos onto. So what do you copy them onto? And there's all kinds of things that in the past were common but aren't anymore. I can remember when I first started out in computers, punch paper tape, which is what you see there, was a common thing to store data on, or punch cards, which you also see there, was common for storing data. And good luck finding somebody that can read those today. So the question becomes, what will people be using 100 years from now if you want your photos to be able to survive? I don't know if most of you know what this photo is, but it's a wax cylinder. And it used to be what people used to record music on. You could buy these wax cylinders and you could buy players that could play them. And of course, nobody's got those anymore except museums. So here's just a couple of things, or a few things that I thought that everybody thought would last forever. And I use these all the time. So in the upper left-hand corner is a floppy disk. I know you all recognize those. Videotapes. A lot of people can't play those anymore. phonograph records in the upper right, although they're making a little bit of a comeback and a lot of audiophiles really enjoy having those. But the idea that I wouldn't have multiple working phonograph players, just if you told me that 20 years ago, I would have thought that was insane. Most of you probably don't recognize what's in the lower left-hand corner. That's a smart media card. I used to have several cameras that use those. They're impossible to find anymore. Slides, people used to take slides all the time, and 8mm film people used to shoot all the time. And all of these things are hard to find now. So what should you copy photos onto if you want to make sure that they'll survive for a long time? Well, let's talk about a couple of poor choices. SD cards, flash drives, and obviously diskettes. Nobody uses diskettes anymore. It turns out that memory cards and flash drives don't last as long as you might think. If you put data on flash drives or memory cards and you just throw them up on the shelf, you'll come back 5 or at most 10 years from now and probably find that there's nothing on it anymore. These things were not meant to be long-term storage, and they actually don't last very long. So what are some good things? Well, I'll give you a couple of things that are good to store data on long-term. Believe it or not, one of them is CDs and DVDs. Now, a lot of people don't have CDs and DVD players anymore, but there are still a lot of them out there. And there's a lot of data, a lot of movies, sound, videos, a lot of stuff recorded on CDs. And it's my belief that you'll be able to find people that have these players for a long time to come. At least libraries, archives, things like that are going to have CDs and DVD players for a long time. And you'll be able to buy them for a long time, I think. So there's a list of some of the types of media that are on what we call optical media, CDs and DVDs, CDRs, DVD-Rs, DVD plus Rs. You can still find these easily on Amazon. Some of the bad choices are over on the right. For various reasons, I wouldn't expect these to last very long, but the ones on the left-hand side are good. Now, what are some things that can go wrong with these? Well, over time, most CDs that you can record onto have got an aluminum reflective layer that will eventually corrode over time. And they use dyes to record information, and that degrades over time. And so what's the answer? How can you make sure that it's going to last a long time and you're not going to have the aluminum and the dyes degrade? Well, they actually make something called an archival CD and DVDs. And these are media that are specifically meant to have data recorded on them and to last a long, long time. They're a little more expensive than a regular CD or DVD. And one of the reasons is because the reflective layer is made of gold, not aluminum. Gold obviously is a lot more expensive. So you can spot one of these archival DVDs because they have a gold color to them. They use special long-lasting dyes, and nobody knows for certain, but it's believed that you can record something on these DVDs and expect to find it there 100 years later if you take care of the DVDs. They are a little bit on the pricey side. They're not terrible. The ones that we use, and we actually use these here at work. I work in a medical office, and we have to archive people's medical records. Legally, we have to keep these records for a long, long time, and we use DVDs to record them. And so Verbatim makes what they call ultralife gold archival DVDs. You can buy a 5-pack on Amazon, and I just checked these prices earlier this year for a little over $12. So that's pretty pricey compared to a normal DVD. A typical DVD for about the same price, you can get 50 of them. But you don't have to do this often, obviously. Record your photos on it and you're pretty much done with it. So it's not prohibitively expensive. Once you record your photos onto the DVDs, some tips for keeping them, and this really applies for any DVD or CD. So if you've just got movies or audio CDs laying around, all of this applies. Store them in a cool, dark place. Store them in the plastic cases that they come in. You want to label the cases, not the DVDs themselves. So what people are tempted to do, they've got this nice blank DVD and they'll take a Sharpie and they'll write on them what it is. So photos 2001 to 2005. Don't do that. Write on the case, not on the DVD or CD itself. And don't use stick-on labels. All of these things can damage the CDs or the DVDs. And finally, buy name brands. So there are the common name brands in the industry: JVC, DVD, Memorex, Maxell, Verbatim, Sony, and there are a few others. These actually are preferable to the bulk CDs and DVDs that you can buy dirt cheap. They just don't put the kind of quality into them that the name brands do. So this is one of the cases. Nobody likes buying store brands more than I do. And every time I go to Walmart, if there's a version available in great values, that's what I buy. But this is one of those places where buying a name brand really is better. So make lots and lots of copies. You can make as many copies as you want, obviously, of these DVDs. Keep copies elsewhere. One of the things I do is I not only record my photos onto DVDs, but I take copies of those DVDs and I throw them in my desk at work. That way, if my house burns to the ground and all of those DVDs at home get burnt up, at least I've got copies at work. I'll give copies to friends or family. So again, if my house burns to the ground and the office burns to the ground, then I've got friends and family that have got copies too. If you don't know how to make CDs or DVDs, it's not hard. And here's a free piece of software that'll do it for you. I really like this one, A Shampoo Burning Studio. They've got a free version. It'll nag you to buy the paid version, but there's really no reason you need to. Just stick with the free version. And if you've got a CD or a DVD burner, you can make CDs and DVDs all day long. So I really like that option. Another option is to use external hard drives. And here's the key point. You want a spinning mechanical hard drive, not a solid state drive. More and more, these external hard drives are going to solid state drives, but you can still find the mechanical hard drives very easily. Probably most of them still are these mechanical hard drives, and that's what you want to use. SSDs are not made to hold data long term. So again, pick a reliable brand. Here's an interesting point. Pick a lower capacity. It turns out that as you pick higher and higher capacity hard drives, so as you go from a 1 terabyte hard drive to a 2 terabyte to a 4 terabyte to a 16 terabyte, they actually get less reliable. So if you want to be able to record your photos on a hard drive that's going to last for a long, long time, last for decades, we hope, get a 1 terabyte drive or a 2 terabyte drive and use that instead of one of the bigger hard drives. Stay away from the bleeding edge. If there's some fancy new technology in hard drives, that's not what you want to use to store stuff long term. Get traditional old 1 terabyte hard drives or 2 terabyte hard drives with no fancy new technology, and they'll last. Store the hard drives in a cool, dry place. And here's the important thing, spin it up occasionally. So what do I mean by that? Hard drives do not like to sit unused for year after year after year. The bearings eventually wear out in an interesting way if they never get used. And essentially the drives will lock up if they never get spun. So what you want to do is on some regular basis, just plug the drive into your computer, go look at a couple of photos, and then you can unplug it and put it away again. And do that on some kind of regular basis. So what I like to do, and it's coming up, I have a New Year's tradition. So every New Year's, I've got nothing better to do. You know, all my friends are sleeping off hangovers. So I'm sitting in front of the computer watching the parades. What do? I copy some of my hard drives where I've got the photos, not hard drives, DVDs, where I've got stuff backed up. I take all my backup hard drives and I just plug them in and look at a couple of photos on each one. Then I unplug them and put them away again. So that way, at least every year, the hard drive gets spun up, gets exercised a little bit, and that really helps improve its longevity. It also means that if one of the hard drives has gone bad, you'll actually find out about it when you plug it in and nothing happens. And another thing that I'll do, if I've taken some good photos that year, I'll put them on DVDs and send them to friends and family, or email them, or put them up on OneDrive and share them with friends and family so that they have copies of them too. And that way, if something happens to my copies, then somebody else has got copies as well. Online services are great. So Flickr, Shutterfly, Facebook, Google Photos, OneDrive, Blurb, there's lots of them. They're a great place for sharing photos, and good to have another place where you've got copies of all your photos. However, don't ever count on an online service as being the only place you've got your photos stored, because many of these services have gone out of business, and people usually they'll warn their users, come get your photos, we're closing. Who just did that? Amazon Drive is closing at the end of the month. And so they've been sending out emails for a long time to all of their users, come get your data because we're shutting down at the end of 2022. But every once in a while, one of these services will just disappear. And if that was the only place you had your photos stored, then you can lose them. So make sure, use online photos, but make sure that's never the only place you have your photos stored. You can also just print out photos. That's a good way to keep copies. So have a copy on an online service, one or more online services, make some DVDs, put them on hard drives, whatever. But you can also print some of your best photos so that you've got printed photos. So one question is, how long do you expect a printed photo to last? Well, it depends, and nobody really knows. So there's been some estimates on how long printed photos will last. And here's one that I saw: in 20, 50, or 100 years, we'll know what really worked and what didn't when it comes to printed photos. But until then, all we can do is guess. So here's the best estimates I've seen. Color prints and negatives should last about 40 years. So if you have something professionally printed, it ought to last about 40 years. Inkjet photos under ideal circumstances could last as long as 75 years or better, but most inkjet photos are going to last less than 5 years. Wow, that's a big difference. So what you get out of this statistic is that photos that you print on your own printer could last longer than commercially printed photos, but probably won't. So how can you make sure that the photos do last the 75 years and not the 5 years? So let's talk about that. First of all, use good photo paper. In most cases, the more you pay for photo paper, the better it is and the longer it will last. Now, that's not always true. You could potentially get ripped off. But in general, when you pay more for photo paper, you actually get better photo paper, especially from some of the really good manufacturers. Here's one that's never popular, but it's true. Use the manufacturer's ink. Now, I'm not saying I always use the manufacturer's ink. I love buying ink from LD products and other third-party ink manufacturers. But if you want to print photos that will actually last as long as possible, use the manufacturer's ink. It is actually better. Use premium photo paper. This goes back to the photo paper. Don't use the fast dry. If you can find photo paper that's labeled as fast dry, but the way that works actually decreases the longevity of what you print on the photo paper. This one's really important. Keep photos out of direct sunlight. So when we talk about how do you get the 75 years, how do you get photos that last 75 years? You don't get that on photos that are hanging up on your wall in direct sunlight. You get that out of photos that are put away in a dark place. So keep photos that you want to last out of direct sunlight. And if you are going to display photos, keep them under glass. That actually helps them last longer. So I know everybody in here can remember when you used to buy a photo frame and it always had glass in it, and you put your photos under the glass. And they did that because it actually helped the photo last. And that's in addition to, of course, if something gets spilled on it or splattered on it, obviously the glass is going to help. but it's really easy to buy photo frames now that don't have glass. And if you want the photo in there to last, it needs to have the glass. So let's talk about how to make sure your photos are identified. Now, what did people do when there was no digital photos, when we got photos printed by a photo processor? You could frequently flip the photo over and written on the back was who the photo was of. Well, we can't do that with digital photos. And it's going to be very common as we go forward to have people that are looking at digital photos that were taken by their parents, let's say, and they have no idea who it is in the photos. So obviously you can't write on the back of a digital photo, but what you can do, number one, is organize your photos into meaningful photos folders. Sorry, organize your photos into meaningful folders on your computer. So here's an example of an actual screenshot of my computer, and you can see that every folder's got a date on it, and it's got a brief description of what the photos in that folder are of. Now, that may not identify the individual people in every photo, but at least you get some idea. You know, if you look at the directory or the folder that says Dog Beach with Gwen, well, okay, so me and my wife may be identifiable to our grandchildren, but they'll look at the third person and they can't identify that person, and they'll say, oh, well, okay, it was somebody named Gwen. And if they want to dig enough, they can probably find out who that was. What I like to do is in each of these folders, I'll use Notepad to create a text file. And in that text file, I'll identify some of the photos and who's in them. So I might have a photo in that folder called image_5301. That's just the name the camera puts on it. And I'll type a quick description, Aunt Millie on her birthday. Okay, so somebody looking through that folder can pull up this text file and figure out who some of the people in some of the individual photos are. Do I do this for all the folders, and do I do this for all of my photos? No, of course I don't. But if I want to make sure that a particular photo, somebody's going to know who's in that photo, this is what I do. Don't use Word, don't use photo organizing software, because those things change. And it's possible that if you put a Word document in there, that 50 years from now, nobody's going to be able to read that Word document. Word has changed its format over its existence. And you may not be able to read a Word photograph 50 years for a Word document 50 years from now that you create today. There's also something called the EXIF data. Most people don't know about this, but if you pull up the properties for a photo, it's actually got a place under the details where you can put in a title and description and some other information. You can put a rating on it. You can put comments on it, and that's actually stored as part of the photo. That's a nice thing to do, but most people don't know it's there. And if your kids find a photo in the future, they may not know to check that. So I like to do that for my own reference, but it's probably not something you can count on for other people being able to find information about the photos. And the last topic is, how can you make sure that your photos are found? The thing that I worry about is I've got a hard drive that's full of photos, and what if someday when I'm not here anymore, my kids just throw my computer out, or my grandkids just throw the computer out, and they never realize that they just threw out 100,000 photos. So I want to make sure that they know where my photos are. They would never do that if they knew the photos were there, but maybe they don't think there's anything interesting on a particular hard drive and they just throw it out. Or they find some DVDs, they don't know what's on it, and they throw it out. So with physical photos, we typically throw those in a box or an album or something like that. It was easy to identify. But we don't do that with digital photos. The photos are typically only stored on the computer's hard drive. They're easy to lose, and individual memory cards or external hard drives, just too easy to lose, especially as they get smaller and smaller. So some things you can do to make sure that your kids and your grandkids can actually find your photos. Put CDs, DVDs, and hard drives of photos with your important papers. So always make sure if you've got a safe deposit box, or if you've got a box or a safe where you keep your important papers, put copies of all your photos in there too. The CDs and hard drives don't take up much space. You can always find room for copies of all your photos. Tell people where they are, especially kids. So my kids know where are they supposed to look to find this stuff. They know I keep it in the safe. They know where it's backed up. And every year I send them updates of where all this stuff is stored so that I'm sure that at some point in the future, they're going to know where to find my photos. Put labels on all your hard drives and CD cases. So make sure that it says photos 2001 to 2005 or whatever's recorded on it, so that somebody that finds it knows what's in it. And the key point is make sure people realize what they found. If somebody comes across a DVD or a CD of yours, and they know those are photos, those are videos, and so they're not going to just get tossed with other things that are unimportant. Here's one that I absolutely love. Make a photo book and put your DVDs in the back of the photo book. I don't know how many people in here have done this, but this is just a whole lot of fun. There are services, and I've listed a few of them here. I've used some of these, where you can send them a bunch of your photos or use an online application that they've got to upload your photos, and they will send you a beautiful printed book with all your photos in it. Now, you can't do this with every photo you own. If you own 100,000 photos, you couldn't possibly afford to have all those printed in books. But take some of your best photos, the ones that you really think encapsulate some of your best experiences. Make a photo book out of them, and then stick the DVDs. You can buy these little photo holders that you can put in the back of the book to hold your DVDs. If you look on Groupon, you can find coupons sometimes for $10 or less plus shipping to have these books made. They're really, even when you pay full price, they're not fabulously expensive. Just have a few of these books made so that your kids and your grandkids have got copies of some of your best photos, and then they've got DVDs in the back that have got a really large selection of your photos. If you don't want to have a book made, just buy a photo album. You can still go into Michael's and buy a traditional photo album, print out a few of your photos on an inkjet printer, and stick a DVD in the back that's got copies of all your photos. It's a great way to make sure that people realize what they found. And an idea that I really like, and for my family, this has become me, is have a family archivist. And this is something that a family kind of has to agree on. Agree that there's one person in your family that's going to collect materials from all the other family members, so that everybody knows that, hey, if Fred loses all of his photos, I know that I can go to John, and he's the family archivist, and he's going to have copies of everybody's photos, or at least, from maybe not for the current year, but from, maybe every New Year's on back, he's going to have copies. Make sure that person's got lots of copies. The family archivist can be the person that makes fresh copies on a regular basis, so that we never have to worry about it being recorded on an old DVD or CD. And hopefully the family archivist is somebody that actually is interested in computer technology. So everybody on this presentation is probably a good candidate for that, and watches for things like file format and media changes. So a family archivist would have realized that, hey, floppy disks are going away. Maybe I need to take all the data I've got stored on floppy disks and put them on CDs and DVDs or something else, whatever, zip drives or whatever is current for now. So I think this is a really good thing to do. So the next time you have a family reunion or a family gathering, talk about appointing somebody that's going to become the family archivist and collect all this documentary data from people throughout the family. So, conclusion. Your family history might have ended, like we said, when you got a digital camera, but it doesn't have to. So most of us have photos of our grandparents that look like this. The photos are faded, washed out, possibly torn. So imagine what it would mean to your kids and your grandkids and your great-grandchildren 100 years from now to have photos with the colors as crisp and vibrant as real life. And what would you have given to have such flawless photos of all your great-grandparents and your great-great-grandparents? Well, with a little bit of attention, your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren can have photos that look like this, where the colors are as vibrant and they have photos that look as good as the day they were taken. All you have to do is just take a little bit of care to make sure that that you don't lose the photos and that the photos get preserved from one generation to the next. So thanks, that's all I've got. And if there's any questions, I'd be glad to talk about them.
Now, Mark, I'll have to say you did it again. I've been hosting these shows, and today you gave me some new information that I will put to good use.
Well, excellent.
Am I looking at the family archivist, John?
Not necessarily. That's a lot of work.
Just asking, because
Yeah.
everybody always thinks retired people have all the time in the world to do things like this. They don't realize how busy we really are, even though we don't have jobs anymore.
That's exactly right.
Anyway, Larry would like to know if you can recommend an iOS app to take raw pictures on the iPhone.
Oh, that is a really good one. I don't know for a fact that an iPhone can do that. It probably can, but I don't know that. And I'm not an Apple person, I'm an Android person. So maybe somebody else can help with that. I'm afraid I don't know.
Okay, you guys that are iPhone people be thinking about an answer for that when I'm finished with my questions.
Judy, I do know some iPhone people though, so maybe if you send me that person's email address, I can look into it.
And Clark wants to know if you know about a good scanner to use to scan slides.
So I don't know of a specific model, but I'll tell you something that I have noticed. So I had a bunch of photos, old photos that I wanted to scan, and I tried scanning some of them myself and had a pretty good scanner. I think the scanner I've got is pretty good. I then saw a deal to send them off to one of the services where you can send them a big box of 1,000 photos and they'll scan them and send them back. And I have to say, what they returned to me was better than what I could do. And so I'm sure there are some really good scanners out there, but some of these commercial services that are not terribly expensive will do a really, really good job. And we wound up sending all of our photos off to, and I don't remember the name of the company we used, but they just did a fabulous job. And I'm not convinced I could have done as good a job no matter what equipment I had within reason.
Thank you. And I attended the Indian Prairie Computer Club meeting prior to our Wednesday workshop. They're in Illinois, and they meet in the library, and two of the librarians gave a holiday gift presentation. It was the best holiday gift presentation I have ever seen. I usually think, oh my gosh, why in the world would they think that? If I hadn't already bought presents for everybody, they would have gotten stuff from that presentation. And one of them uses the Sharper Image Slide film strip scanner and thought it was very, very good. And it's $129 at Amazon. And so go for that. Let me see. Oh, someone would like to know if the film strip on the left-hand side of your presentation, did you create that, or did you pick that up at images.google.com or someplace like that?
Yeah, boy, I wish I'd done that. No, I actually picked that. It's a piece of clip art. So yeah, not mine. Sorry.
Okay, that was from Clark too. So sorry, Clark. Is because if you had done it yourself, he wanted you to do another tutorial on that. And a couple of comments. So that's it. So over to Diana. Unmute yourself, please.
Okay, I was going to respond to the question about a scanner for slides. Now, this is not a recent model, but I had really good luck with an Epson Perfection scanner a few years ago. And the thing I loved about it was that it had a frame where you could put like a dozen slides into the frame and it would scan them all at one time. So you weren't doing one at a time. And I had hundreds of slides from the family to work with. So that saved me a lot of time. And the software that came with the scanner, I was using a Mac, but the software was able to handle that group of slides. And the results were quite good. So I don't know what the current model is, if they have a comparable one, but I would look for that if I were you and not waste time with one at a time scanning. And of course, the services, I'm sure, are very good. They must use stuff like that themselves.
And in our chat box, we have a recommendation for an Epson. I know one of my members who is into genealogy uses an Epson flatbed and scanner, and he is very, very pleased with that.
Right.
Jerry, you're on. Unmute yourself, please. Thank you.
Okay, there are a couple of questions. Number one, when saving photos, what format should you save them in? JPEG, PNG, TIFF, and what DPI would you recommend?
Well, so I save them as JPEGs, but I save them as full size. So whatever the camera takes, I can't bear to resize them and lose some of that resolution. So I wind up with photos that are about 4.5 megabytes a piece. So the problem with PNG is that the file sizes can get so big. So I use PNG when I'm doing diagrams and things like that, because that doesn't get quite so large. But for photographs, they can get really big. And the same thing for TIFF. So TIFF and PNG are going to be the best choices when you absolutely want the best resolution you can possibly get, that and RAW format. JPEG is a nice compromise. You get smaller file sizes. You pay for that by losing a little bit of resolution, but I think they're still very good. So yeah. JPEG is the format I use.
I have a follow-on question. I've been doing what you've suggested, perhaps not to the extent that you've explained it. I use a Mac. Would it be wise to save your photos library, or is it better to save individual photos on an external hard drive?
Mark, unmute, please.
Whoops, I'm sorry. The one thing you want to be careful of is you don't want to get locked into some format that somebody 50 years from now or even 10 years from now might not be able to read. So if you save the individual photos, anybody, regardless of what equipment they've got, is going to be able to read a JPEG. Whereas if you store a library, is that going to limit you to somebody that's got a Mac? And might that change over some period of time where maybe even a Mac user 30 years from now couldn't read that? I don't know. JPEG is likely to still be readable by anybody 50 years from now.
Good. Thank you so very much. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Richard.
Yeah, just a comment on if you're printing out photos, it's better to look for printers that use, they don't use the dye ink, they use the, what do you call it, pigment ink. So some printers, they supply cartridges that use a pigment ink rather than a dye ink. They mightn't be quite as vibrant, but the color will be much longer lasting.
Okay, that's interesting. I hadn't looked at that. Appreciate that, Richard.
Cool. Jack.
Yes. Yeah, can you hear me? I think I'm
Perfectly.
unmuted. Yeah, just a short question. Mark put his contact information briefly on the screen for like 2 seconds, and then he went to the next slide. Can you put that up again, please?
It'll come
Yes.
out to you, Jack, in the follow-up email.
Okay, there you go.
Okay. All right, thank you very much.
You'll get his whole presentation.
Okay, thank you.
Same as usual, nothing changes. And Joel,
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just going to make a comment. I've actually used an Epson Perfection V500 for several years because it has slide support. But basically, I changed my views over the years and what formats to use. And that particular scanner software doesn't allow me to save directly in that format, but I save it initially in TIFF to get full resolution. And then there are utilities which allow you to do mass conversion into WebP format, which is a better compression than PNG and has a variant that is lossless. So I can save a lossless version in somewhat less space than the PNG. And then I also, because some of the viewers that I've got don't recognize that, I also save a copy of it in JPEG, which is less space still, but that allows me to scan through the images more quickly. And the other thing, resolution sort of depends not just on the scanner's capabilities, but on your camera's capabilities. If these are old slides that we're taking with a non-professional camera, my scanner will support up to 4,800 pixels per inch, but I've found that I can't tell the difference between one at that resolution versus 1,200 because the focus on the cameras that were originally used to take the picture wasn't that good. So there's no point in scanning a fuzzy image at a real high resolution off of slides.
Yeah, agree.
Roz, over to Steve.
Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, Roz, we can hear you.
Okay. I want to thank you because I was about to buy a photo stick and looks like that's not going to be the way to go unless it can be a temporary holding place and then you do something with it.
Oh, sure, that's fine. The thing I worry about is that somebody's going to store photos on it and say, well, those are nice and safe, and throw them on a shelf and then find out 5 or 10 years later that it's gone. So as long as you realize that that's a good place to source something for 6 months or a year, but not longer than that, then that's fine.
Okay, thank you.
And that was another device that the one of the library people had as a tech gift, and she said that too. It's great for right now. I've got a bunch of photos. I need to save them on there, but not permanent. So 2 for 1 from me today. Steve Parker, you're on.
Good. Okay. Another company, whether you've heard of it or not, I don't know, but it's called Placke. And what they do is they take a photograph that you printed or any other way that you want to get your photograph, and they actually make a plaque out of it. It's sort of a high density fiber board that has the photograph embedded into it, and it's better than anything that you could, put up on the wall with glass in front of it. And I did this for an aerospace engineering company with some really detailed engineering photographs that I took of a lot of the equipment. The next time I went into the office, both walls down the entire office were plaqued with all these plaques that I'd printed. It was amazing.
Could you put that name of the company in the chat box, please?
Sure.
Thank you. George.
Do you know if a takeout on Google, like I do takeouts on my Google Photos to back them up locally, whether it contains the alterations I might have made with the Google Photo editor? Or is it just the original raw image?
I don't know the answer to that because I don't use the service. Maybe somebody else does. I
Now,
would
it
imagine
would
it's
be
got,
the same as, I don't know if, you know, Microsoft OneDrive offers a takeout service where you can download all of your contents.
well, they allow you to synchronize it locally with your hard drive, and anything that's up in the cloud is going to wind up getting synchronized to your hard drive. So if you edit it in the cloud, it's going to wind up on your hard drive as well. So I don't know if that's the
Okay.
same. Yeah, maybe
Possibly
somebody else does.
Possibly a synchronized copy would suffice. I generally don't synchronize everything down to my local drive. Thanks.
Okay, just one thing that's kind of interesting. If you look at OneDrive and Dropbox and Google Drive and all of those guys, they all say in their terms of service that if they lose your data, they'll be really sorry about it, but that's it.
Yeah, no, that's why I do the takeouts.
Yeah,
So that
okay.
I have my own local copy.
Okay.
One other quick point. I've done a couple of life service type of things for people by just photographing with my digital camera their photo albums. They're not really high resolution and all of that, but it's a very quick way to capture a photo album and to create a slideshow for a live gathering.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Guy, you're on.
Okay, hi. I'm not pushing any particular service, but I've used an online service just recently. And after my mother passed away, and I'm doing all of and sharing it with the family. So it's a great thing, and the family really loved it. Plus, I just wanted to show, yeah, I'm not pushing any products, but this is a Brother. It's a little teeny tiny scanner, and I've used it for my extra photos that I didn't send to the service, or things like certificates and keepsakes that you want to keep, you know, from high school and whatever. It has a little easel and you can size it here. It is Brother 1700W. But anyway, I just love it. It's wireless, and just want to pass that on. I've also used the photo stick. I like the photo stick. It's just more difficult and time consuming to share your photos. However, I think it's a good use for a backup temporarily. So I just wanted to share. That's all I had to say.
Cool, thank you. Di, could you put the scanner name and model in the chat box and the service that you used?
Well, I already put the service, but I didn't know if you wanted me to say it on air like I was pushing. You know, I use iMemories, and I was just in there last night on my site. If you're not familiar with iMemories, you know, sometime I could share my screen, but I was totally blown away, impressed with it. I can also upload additional things. I can change all the names of the albums. I can rearrange, I can move, I can delete. I can do everything in that. And I pay $49 a year online storage for my ability to do that. So again, I don't want to push it. The other one could be just the same. That just happened to be the box I ordered, and I've been working on mine for over 2 years. And it has over 50 videos on it now, and over 5,000 photos. And there's no additional charge for the storage capacity.
Cool, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Steve
And
Parker, who has his hand up right now, says simple raw camera for your iPhone app for taking raw photos. Simple raw camera app. And you'll get the information in the follow-up stuff. Last question from Diana King, and then Mark is off to his holiday party.
Okay, I just had a word of caution, I think, about the photo stick kind of devices. I bought one of those thinking that I could collect my photos off a couple of different computers that I have. And then I found out that the device wouldn't work in the oldest one because of the operating system being older. And consequently, I could get it off the newer one, but not that one. And I was wondering about that kind of thing happening for the future. If you use a photo stick now with a current operating system, and then several years from now, you go to use it, are you going to run into a problem with it not working with whatever operating system is current at that time? So I was curious, and I don't, this is about something that could happen in the future. So I don't know if it would happen, but it makes me wonder.
Well, I think it's a concern. And I think just a flash drive, that's been formatted without using any special software, just allowed Windows or the Mac to format it, it's probably going to be readable if the flash drive itself survives. And that's the issue, of course, is that
Right.
the flash memory is usually not good for more than a decade or so.
Super, Mr. Mark. Thank you so much. We love the new knowledge, and you have a great holiday party.
Well, thanks. The party here at work actually doesn't start for another half hour, so I get to stick around and see some of John's presentation too.
Okay, good to go. John Kennedy, over to you.
Okay, great. Mark, I'd like to thank you very much for being a part of our presentation today. And those of you who have names that we can match up in our database for registration will get the follow-up material and enjoy this a second time.